Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This episode has been sponsored by our generous patrons over on patreon.com/Red Hills Rancher. Check the show notes for a link. This week, I think I've got something really special lined up for you. I have a small homesteader from upstate New York that's here to, well, I'm not real sure where we're going to go with this conversation. She wrote a wonderful paper that she sent to me, and I ended up making 3 pages of notes, and I hope we're going to have a wonderful conversation. So from upstate New York, please welcome my not cousin or otherwise related, Victoria Alexander. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. I want to thank my nephew, Preston, who's in Texas. He's got a farm, 30 acres in Roxton, and he's putting the fence up, got the pond in. He's going to do Beefmaster cattle.
Awesome.
He told me about the show.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the message you sent in, and we were kind of talking. We've been talking for a few minutes before I pressed the recording button. Yeah, I'll be honest. And you were introduced by, that's kind of what you said in your email, and then you sent this paper that I read, and like I'm really itching to get into it, but let's put a pin in that and let's talk about you for a little while. Let's talk about tell me some of your story about where you're at and how you got there.
Well, it's kind of odd that I ended up being a farmer, but I guess after 9/11, I was a little bit nervous about security and safety living in Manhattan. So I took the train 2 hours north and found this little old farmhouse built in 1750. And taught myself how to farm, on YouTube videos, bought some sheep. And we're at the point now, I do canning about 200 quarts every year. We're at the point now where if the food supply completely collapsed, we wouldn't starve. I'd be in better shape. I'd probably lose 10 pounds. That would be great. We wouldn't have any junk food. Looking forward to the complete collapse. But when I was in Manhattan, I'm an academic. I'm a philosopher of biology and complex systems. I don't know if the philosophy really being a philosopher of biology really helps with raising animals. Helps me think about it in the larger picture of things.
I would argue that being able to think about things in a larger picture is kind of critical for anybody in agriculture.
Yeah, sure. Understanding an ecosystem is complex system science, and that's the area that I worked in. So yeah, I think it helps a lot if you understand that permaculture is really complex systems, understanding how complex systems work.
For sure. So tell me about your permaculture garden.
Well, permaculture is a trademark name. Did you know that? Some guy, yeah.
Do I owe somebody 75 cents for saying it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm doing permaculture the way that I should be, but I don't want to have to work too hard. And I don't want to put herbicides and pesticides. And so I've just learned over the years that if I put a ton of cottonwood leaves in my potato garden, and stick the potatoes under there, I get a huge crop without doing any gardening or turning over the soil or anything. And I didn't learn that. I just had needed somewhere to put all my leaves when I raked them up, and I found that that works for the cabbage really well too. And then put little mounds on them, and it's terrible for eggplant. Don't try that. And it's just trial and error over the years. I can't grow broccoli no matter how hard I try. Um,
Broccoli's hard.
yeah, I think you have to be in a different climate. Maybe California is better for broccoli.
We've had a little bit out of our garden, like big, huge plant, little itty bitty like broccoli florets.
Yeah, little tiny things.
Yeah,
I
a lot of
do.
plant, not a lot of flower.
I do really great okra. I'm known around here for doing a lot of okra, which is unusual for this area. But I'm a Texan, so of course I have okra that's doing great. My asparagus is just nuts. And so I have a little farm stand at the end of my driveway. I'm not a in the business. I'm just growing food for my family. And then we have sheep. It goes from 6 to 12 or 16 or so, depending on how many lambs we had and how many we didn't sell. Um, I got a cut on my face today because I was wrangling a ewe 2 days ago and she kicked me in the face.
Oh, that's okay. I did one of these the other day. Um, and for those of you that do support on Patreon, you get to watch the video version on YouTube. I had a big old piece of cow crap on my face. It's like I'm sitting here looking at myself going, what is that spot? And didn't clean it up till afterwards. So that happened, but perks of the job, dangers of the job, I guess, something like that.
Yeah. So we have Navajo churro sheep, and they are really hardy and don't eat that much. So we have 5 acres, and that's enough for 6 to 10 sheep, say. And
Tell me about that. Tell me about those sheep. I'm kind of curious as to why. I've never heard of that breed.
really,
No, I never have.
well, they were on the endangered list for a while, but it was the Navajo Indians got them from the Spanish. The Spanish brought churro sheep over, and the Navajo bred them. They're kind of a little bit of a long-haired sheep, and that's what they make the Navajo rugs out of.
Okay.
It's a good, tough textile. Um, and they're good meat sheep even when they're older. So it's nice. They're both not much of a milk sheep at all, but they're very, very hardy. They never get sick. And I've never had any problems with them giving birth either until this year. One finally died in giving birth, and that was horrible. But for 12 years or so, never had any problem.
Interesting.
Never had to assist or anything. So they're good sheep.
So sheep that have been sheep genetics that have been on this continent for a long time and been adapted to live.
Yeah, in dry areas too, in dry, hot areas, they do well, and they do fine here too. So, yeah.
Well, we haven't said it. So where is here? You said 2 hours north of Manhattan.
2 hours north of Manhattan, and it's just a little tiny town called Amenia, which means pleasing to the eye in Latin.
Okay.
I wrote a novel called Locus Amenus, which is pleasant locale. I'm a novelist too, in addition to being a philosopher. And it's a satire. It's a dark comedy about 9/11. It's Hamlet is a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, rewritten for modern times. So
that'll be interesting. I'll have to make sure I have the correct spelling of that to put that in the show notes. I might even have to get that on Audible.
So,
is it on Audible?
It was just taken down. I got to put it up again. Long story about that. It's the actor who did the audiobook died during COVID, and so the rights shuffled around, and it'll be up again soon. It's up on my website for free right now. But Locus Amenus is that it means pleasant location. It's sort of like Eden. It's that pastoral paradise where nothing bad will ever happen until it does. And so it's a long tradition in literature that going back to the Greeks, talking about the shepherds, singing about their loves and things like that. And so I set the book in Armenia, since it's Locus Armenia, Locus Aminus. It's same, and so it's a comedy about a city person trying to learn how to be a shepherd and interacting with the locals and learning how to get along.
There's probably no real life flavor thrown in there at all.
Yeah. So
how does a Texas girl end up as a philosopher in New York City?
mhm. I met a German boy in Dallas and went off to Berlin when I was a teenager, and then flew back to New York and didn't have enough money to go any further and got a job there. And that's the story, really.
Okay.
That's it. That's how I ended up in New York. And I liked New York. I liked New York a lot. Now I love Texas too. I look back at Texas and I see the independent people in Texas, and I'm so proud of what people are doing in Texas. Not putting up with a lot of the government craziness.
We'll probably circle back into some of that later.
From New York, it looks like you guys are doing better.
From here, we look at the coasts and kind of wonder what y'all are doing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's sometimes it's not real clear what why the coastal elites want to do what they want to do, or the policies that y'all want to think will be a good idea. Sometimes it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us out here in the as a lot of folks would call it, flyover country. But that's fine. If you want to call it flyover country, just stay on the airplane and keep bouncing back and forth. If you want to look at some really pretty parts of the world, you got to get off the interstates every once in a while.
Yeah, and don't forget that New York State is a huge state, and it's mostly rural. You got that tiny little island down there, those suburban, but I'm 2 hours, just 2 hours north of New York City, and there's nothing out here. We have one stoplight.
Actually, I had a young lady that worked for me a couple years ago, and she was from like the western part of upstate New York.
Yeah.
And she said it's a lot like anywhere else in the Midwest. It's just a bunch of small farms, trees, be cows, you could pull up to a road intersection, it'll be 1/4 of cows, 1/4 of corn, 1/4 of wheat, and 1/4 of pasture.
Yep.
Pretty rural.
I think from watching television, we get a skewed sense of what most of America is like. I don't remember what I don't remember exactly what the population is between urban and suburban and rural, but there's quite a lot of rural, certainly a lot of land, and so we can go back to. I think a lot of people need to return to the rural areas. Now that everybody's working at home on their computers, they might as well, right? What are they doing?
Well, I think that was one of the things that they were trying to say. Like, I guess one of the next things they'll push then is like, well, since all these people are unemployed, we'll just give everybody universal basic income, and everybody will grow their own food, right? It's just that easy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the cheese in the trap, that UBI.
Like the mouse is in the trap because it doesn't understand why the cheese is free.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So mostly, you said you mostly just do like your farming and gardening for your family to feed your family, and a little bit extra to feed the community.
Yeah, I call it my karma farm stand. I have a little painted sign that says $5 for eggs or $4 for asparagus or whatever. But everybody knows that if they don't have the money, they don't have to put it in. So it's an honor system. And sometimes there's $20 instead of $5. So works out.
Yeah. You don't have any problems with that?
No. And I know there's some people that take the asparagus all the time. They just take all the asparagus. I know that they don't eat well. They don't have healthy food, and they like that asparagus. So, and so they don't pay for it, and that's fine. Um, I'm also giving my neighbors plants, like asparagus root and strawberry plants, nettle roots too, because nettle is a great food, so that they can grow their own food. And when everything collapses, I won't have to feed them. They'll have something. I'm trying to get everybody around me self-sufficient, tell them how to plant potatoes. Those are so easy to grow around here.
You sound like you're certain that there is a collapse coming.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not going to disagree with you. People that have been listening to the podcast for the last several months will know that I've been warning, like, things are going to get bad. Things are going to get bad. I don't think I've actually outright said collapse, because I don't want people to start throwing conspiracy theorists at me, which I guess these days is more just fortune teller, or,
Yeah, I mean, of course, people at the top do conspire with each other to hold their power and to gain more power. I mean, that's the term conspiracy theorist is a little silly. Of course, people in positions of power are corrupt. Of course they are. Yeah, but I mean, they hey, is this called the reboot instead of the reset? Is this the alternative?
Well, I mean, we call it ranching reboot because trying to reboot your thinking about food systems, not necessarily trying to, reboot society.
But I was just wondering if that was, a remark on that. Say we're not going to, because we're not, people say the greater reset or something like that. Yeah, the whole system needs to be reset or rebooted in a way. We need major changes. It would be better if we could make them incrementally so that people don't starve or lose their homes. But as a complex system researcher, I understand that when there is a system-wide collapse, that's the opportunity to rebuild it in a better way. You really can't do those incremental changes, as we were saying before we started the show. It's just too hard. The system is too entrenched. But because the system is really reactive at this point, I mean, the things that the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates and stuff, it's just, or the CARES Act with, creating trillions of fiat money and giving it to wealthy corporations, that is just crazy. That is just completely insane. And anybody that looked at that said, oh, okay, hyperinflation is coming. Of course it is. That's what happens when you make everybody stay home.
But if you said that when they were trying to pass that last $1.2 trillion stimulus package, if you said this is going to cause runaway hyperinflation, they said, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. This will be fine. We've got to pay people or the economy will collapse.
Well, when you do that, it's one thing if you threw a lot of money into the real economy, if you put money into our pockets and then we were able to go out and spend it, and people were out there working to make more goods and services for us. But in addition to all that money, they had everybody staying home, not making any goods or services. So that's when you have inflation, lots of money and nothing to buy. That's the recipe. It always works like that, so.
And the danger we're facing right now, like, if we turn back the clock to say, the 80s, before Reagan deregulation, corporate mergers, and we started moving a lot of manufacturing out of the country.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what that's kind of like the framework of what I'm going to talk about is, like, we don't make shit here anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what the last 2 years have really showed. We don't make anything here anymore.
We make food.
I would argue about the definition of food to some extent. But yeah.
I mean, that's one thing we're still doing. We have all this farmland. So we just need, let's not, Bill Gates is the second largest owner of farmland in the United States. and he's not going to farm it. He's going to put it in conservation or whatever, rewild it.
I
Um,
figured he would contract with people to grow GMO soybeans so he could make fake meat out of them.
I think they want to make the actual, the lab grown meat, cultured from humans or from, beef cells or chicken cells to actually.
They'll have to find something to replace bovine growth serum to do that with.
Yeah.
And like, doesn't each one of those, like, a quarter pound cell cultured patties take like gallons of that bovine growth serum?
I would imagine. I would imagine. And they're Elon Musk's brother is into those, indoor LED, growing lettuce, cilantro, blueberries, and tomatoes. That's our menu. That's what we get. And they're really careful to make sure everything is, completely sanitary. The workers, before they go into the grow room where all the robots are moving the plants around, they sterilize their boots before they walk in, and they've got gloves on and masks. And I'm thinking, my plants are grown right in the sheep poop out there. There's always a little turd or so. There's a bone or two. I mean, the microbiome, you don't know what kind of microorganisms are necessary to make a healthy plant. We have no idea, really. I mean, we're just now learning about beneficial bacteria, in the last 20 years or so. And it seems like in the last 2 years, we've gone the reverse. Everybody's sanitizing their hands. They're killing 99.9% of the good germs, and they're leaving the bad germs on their hands so that they can,
Exactly. Exactly. I yeah. Yeah, COVID changed a lot, and they kind of weaponize fear. I guess I used the C word, so we're going to get another COVID warning on this episode. Thanks, Spotify. Uh, but yeah, COVID made everybody it weaponized fear against bacteria, fear against biology, and it made you like it's made us question things like, is there really natural immunity? Is that a thing?
Yeah, so one of the things that made us doubt our own natural immunity. And so to go back to that paper, that was one of my, the main point that I wanted to make is that a lot of the industrialized farming methods have this assumption that nature is not intelligent on its own. And as a philosopher, one of the things I study is what is the nature of an intelligence? Is slime mold intelligent? If slime mold behaves in a certain way, and so I look at really primitive organisms like that to try to understand what makes slime mold smarter than AI, for instance. That was one of the last papers that I wrote.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, and so there's just this assumption by some of the people in power that the world is mechanistic, and that if you can just get enough data on it, if you study it enough, you can understand it enough to control it. And controlling from that top down method with those hierarchies is dumb. It's stupid. You'll only, real intelligence is distributed, using, the crowd to give you feedback, and the reciprocity of the feedback of, trying this and getting some feedback. That's how our brains work. Our neurons all work together to, come up with an emergent idea. There's no real executive function telling our body, the rest of our body, what to do. And so there's these paradigms in the world, this mechanistic top down paradigm where you can control everything, you can control nature. And then this paradigm where nature is itself intelligent if you learn to work with it. And so you work with nature, and nature can help you understand things better. In the paper, I say that I work with my plants and my animals because together we're smarter than I am alone, always. And there's just there's in that paper, there's things that are unanticipated that work out. For instance, I had a blind chicken named
Sydney.
Sydney, who wandered around, and of course she'd bump into things. and she'd bump into the fence where the grapes are growing and would knock some grapes down. And she's always randomly pecking, seeing what she could get, and she would get grapes that way. And so one year we had a Japanese beetle infestation, and they go for the grapes, and she knocked up against that wire fence, and the beetles came down, and so she's eating the beetles, and the other chickens saw that, and they imitated her by throwing their breasts up against the fence to knock down the beetles. So that was, as a farmer, I let my animals take care of themselves, be a little bit self-sufficient. I don't, lock them in a cage and feed them, because when they're out wandering around, who knows what they could discover. Even a blind chicken could discover something that actually helped the entire flock out and got rid of all those bugs on my grapes. And so if you just let nature happen and observe it, then that was great. That solved a lot of problems for me and created no new ones. Every problem that you try to solve from the top down method by controlling things, you create 5 other problems.
Yeah, kind of like a hydra.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad you got that reference. I won't have to edit that out. So this paper that we're talking about, I'm going to try to get through the title here.
Oh, I'm sorry for that title. Isn't it an awful title? I apologize.
Well, it's your paper.
Let me just tell you that it's called biosemiotics, which bio for life, and
Okay.
semiotics. And semiotics means the study of signs and the degree to which animals and plants use signs to communicate with each other and to understand the world around them.
Okay. So the paper that we're talking about is titled Free Range Humans, Permaculture Farming as a Biosemiotic Model for Political Organization. And that's kind of an intimidating title, especially for a guy that works with cows every day. And I sat down, I managed to get through it with my whatever my reading level is these days. I managed to get through it. I'm not going to lie. I had to look up more than one word and figure out, like, semiotic was definitely one of them. I had to look that up, and I'm still not sure I have my head wrapped around it.
That's fine. That's fine. If I don't have to look up 2 or 3 words every time I read something, then I'm probably not going to enjoy that. I learned something new that way. So expands my vocabulary, have greater semiotic freedom, as we say in my business, which is like knowing 2 or 3 languages. Then you can kind of pick up on more things in the world if you know more languages, or your cow language. You'll understand a lot more things.
So
Somebody else coming onto your farm, if they hear your cows, they probably won't be able to interpret what's going on quite the way that you do. I know I can tell every one of my sheep. I know what they sound like, and I can tell when somebody's in trouble just in a minute or two. It sounds different. And so if I had a caretaker come over to watch the sheep for a week, they might miss something. So
nobody's ever going to be as in tune with the animals as the person that spends the most time with them.
Mm-hmm. So that's really important for farming, and industrial farming really tries to ignore that as if it's not important.
Do you think there's something to emotional animal welfare?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I live in horror thinking that maybe my sheep are self-aware, and they know when some of them are sent to slaughter. Kind of like how slave owners used to think that their slaves weren't like real humans, and they didn't value their offspring, and it was just fine if you sold them down the river. People used to say that, but I say that about my sheep, that I just sold 6 of them a couple days ago, and they're going to live on another farm. They didn't go to the slaughterhouse, but just seeing them in that back of the truck, I worry about them. I know, and I know they're calling for each other, and the ones I have here are calling. Where's the rest of the flock? I
just
know.
just wonder where everybody else is.
Yeah.
I I have a few more head than that, and I don't know all of them on a personal basis, but the longer you have a group of cows, when you're out there every day for a couple hours a day interacting with them, you get to know some of your superstars, both on the
Mhm.
top end and the
Yeah.
bottom end. And right now, I'm commingled with another, let's just say, rancher friend. His cows are with mine, and I can tell a behavior change when his cattle get in with mine. Some of like I'll have a group that'll still stick together, and a bunch of his will stick with mine. Then about a quarter of his will kind of be scattered through the pasture, and then about a third of mine will kind of be off by themselves. It's always interesting to watch how the different groups
The dynamic.
interact with each other. Yeah,
Mhm.
but I can tell. You can tell a lot just by going out and looking at them. How they're holding their heads, how they're looking, like where they're looking, and how they're holding their ears. There's a lot that just being in tune with your animals can teach you. And you know, like take for example a pen rider in a big mega West Texas feedlot. If he's got to look at 7 or 8 thousand head of cattle every day, how well does he know those animals, especially if they're turning over every 90 to 120 days? Or the hog farmer in the confinement barn, he doesn't know those animals. The chicken farmer, there's no way you can get to know 100,000 chickens in what, 6 weeks, 8 weeks that it takes to grow chickens now.
Yeah, I know if one of my sheep are starting to get sick, I know it immediately. Just a slight behavior change. Then I give them the something for the worms. That's one of the things that I was concerned about in that paper, was talking about how the globalization and the to make everything homogeneous and everything the same. We don't want a lot of communication among everyone. The world right now is a little bit too interconnected, and there aren't enough regions that are separate into themselves. I mean, America has gotten so homogeneous. Like if you go into any major city, Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, it looks kind of the same. It's those same box stores and everything. And it's so disorienting, because you say, where am I? Oh, there, I'm in the Marriott, and it's the same Marriott that I was in last month. Uh, it's, the regional character of is so important, that you have your own culture in this little area where you are. You have your own music, you have your own stories, you have your own uh, type of cuisine. Those things are so, so important. And so the like niche building. And right now, I think that there's a lot of talk about how people separate themselves off and become extremists because they're not communicating with the mainstream. They're not watching the mainstream news, and they're not like everybody else. But the best way to foster diversity of ideas and to innovate is to have all these little communities that don't interact, but interact a little bit. A few people go and travel and come back, and you have some visitors. But it's just really important to maintain little niches, little neighborhoods, little regions. Globalization is really a bad idea for diversity, if you care about diversity.
Well, I thought we were supposed to be this big melting pot of all different cultures and peoples and ideas.
Yeah, you don't want to melt them together. You want people to be able to retain their ethnicity and their culture if they want. That's why in New York it's so nice that we have Chinatown and Little Italy. With the people stay. They come from China and they move and they stay in one little neighborhood, and they can retain their culture. And sometimes people can live there in Chinatown for 40 years and never learn any English. They get by, which that disturbs a lot of people, I guess. But it's kind of cool that, you can, although Chinatown is pretty much disappearing now and Little Italy is pretty much gone because developers have come in and wiped that all out. And, there's probably a H&M, you know, instead of
H&M.
H&M is a big clothing store
Oh,
chain.
okay.
Yeah, there's probably that instead of the big fish market that used to be there. Yeah.
The fish market, they used to sell fresh fish that the
Yeah.
fishermen caught and brought in
Yeah.
that morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And just another example of, well, that'd just be an example of local food going away, but probably not real. Anyway, uh, so the question I have, I mean, we talked a little bit before the show about collapse. And that's something that I've talked about before with my friend Hobbs and several other folks. Do I think that? Do I agree with you that we are heading for a collapse? Yes. Do I think it'll be soon? Yes, I think it's already starting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So other than like the basics that I've been yelling about for the last 6 months, which is grow a garden and build your community food system, um, how how does your paper translate? So how can the biosemiotic scaffolding and principles prevent centralization, consolidation of wealth and monopoly power as we're trying to rebuild down the line, assuming that that I'm one of the that we're some of the ones that make it through and get to the rebuilding part.
Well, as I said, the hardest part to redesigning a system is taking out the old one because the infrastructure is all there to support the old system. But since the owners of the old system are taking it apart themselves because they have a great reset agenda that they want to completely change, we have this opportunity to once the system collapse to come up with better ideas. In the paper, I write about a different alternative monetary systems that I'm a philosopher, so all I can do is provide a philosophical grounding for your idea between the conflict between this mechanistic idea of the world and that we can, if we just understood things better, we can control them, which is scientism really, and this understanding that there is something else in the nature of living systems and living beings. We don't have to call it spiritual. I'm a scientist, so I'm not going to call it spiritual, but I call it semiotic, which is these immaterial relationships between living beings in the reciprocity of the good luck that a chicken like Sydney had. Those things are unpredictable. And as I say in my paper, if you had a robot going around, measuring the grapes, and eating them, it would pick up a beetle and realize it's not a grape, and then
Yeah, if you
throw it
built an
away.
if you built a perfect AI chicken that
Right.
could perfectly imitate a chicken, and even one day bumped up against that trellis like Sydney did and knocked the beetles down, it would still eat grapes because it was on the
Grapes.
program to look for
Yeah.
grapes that day.
And Sydney has the ability to misinterpret an object, a beetle, for a grape, and then go, "Oh, this is food too." So that is where to some extent we're all somewhat robotic. We're automatons. We have these habits. We just go through the motions, and we don't have to think to do things. But there are these moments where it's like the pathway splits, and it depends upon an interpretation of the material thing that's in front of your eyes. And a robot is going to have a strict category. It's either a 1 or a 0, and so it can't diversify. But a living being can choose a new pathway and discover an entirely new way of surviving in the world, and that's how evolution happens. A robot isn't going to evolve on its own.
Not yet, anyway.
My paper analyzing that is called Smarter Bots. I forget the title of that one because it's also long, but the idea, we analyze slime mold as the most primitive type of intelligent life known that scientists like to use in their labs. And it can do really smart things. It can find its way around a maze, and a lot of people study slime mold. And it can interpret things. Normally its default motion is to head toward warmth because that's where the food is. But you can do this sort of trick to it like Pavlov's dog, the equivalent of ringing a bell, and you can train it to associate cold with food. And even at slime mold, we're talking slime mold. And so that shows you how organisms use signs, because warmth is a sign of food, and you can change that sign and make cold a sign of food for the slime mold. And that's one of the things that proves that even primitive organisms use signs.
I bet neurologists hate you right now because a slime mold doesn't have a brain, and you just proved that you can teach it something.
Right. That's why I use the slime mold, is because it doesn't have it doesn't have a brain stem. It doesn't have any nerves. It just has a bunch of nucleotides. It just has a multiple nucleus, and so what it amounts to is any life form that is a collection of individual cells can behave intelligently. Slime mold is a bunch of single-celled organisms that fuse together, and so it has thousands of nuclei in it. It's very strange, but you can make analogies to the way a brain works too. I mean, a brain is also just a bunch of neurons. There isn't there's no brain in each neuron, but collectively they don't have minds. A neuron doesn't have a mind, but collectively these mindless things add up to something smart.
Collectively, it's a mass of cells powered by fat that all have kind of a very similar nucleus.
Yeah, and each neuron is complex enough to make interpretations of the signals that it's getting. It's not always on or off, like a 1 or a 0. Every biological cell has a little bit of wiggle room and can mistake one thing for another. Like, for instance, we have we learned with this virus that the virus can attach to one of your receptors, and that receptor is evolved to attach to something else entirely. So when the cell docks with a virus, it's made a mistake. It's made a misinterpretation that's lethal for it. So there's no way to predict what type of new protein on a virus might interact with a protein in one of our cells. It's very difficult to predict. Depends on the context and things. So if we can get away from this, overly simplistic, mechanistic view of the world and have an idea that things in nature are not wholly predictable and can't be controlled, maybe that would give people some humility and not think that, I can just reorder the entire agricultural system in the United States, and we're going to tell all the ranchers are going to have to do everything this way, and everybody's going to have to grow their carrots this way, and just decentralize and let people make their own choices. Some of them will fail, some of them will do well.
The problem with decentralization is, even though the people that are in control of the current system are taking it apart, or the current system is collapsing, whichever side of that particular fence you're on, I think everybody can agree the house of cards is coming down.
Yeah.
The question is what's going to be rebuilt in its place. And if we have to go away from centralization, like if that's the direction we need to go, how do we do that through this coming crash?
Well, Russia has a very good model, decentralized model of agriculture. A long time ago, they made sure that everybody had access to a little plot of land and a little house called a dacha. Or if they don't have a dacha, they have an allotment where they can farm. And I think something like 90% of their potatoes are grown by individuals who have garden plots. Something like 70% of their fruits, berries in particular. So they've diversified their agriculture, and it's much more stable because everybody's growing their own. So if you get a problem on one farm, it doesn't spread. If one flock of chickens gets sick, you don't wipe out 1,000 birds. So there is a model already, and I think in order to do that in the United States, the first thing that I would say is follow Henry George's notion that, kind of a modified version of his notion, but every citizen in the United States deserves to own a subsistence plot of land tax-free.
Interesting concept.
It's not a new concept. It's really like in Russia, they have that, for instance. It's, the idea of the commons. It's kind of an old idea. But what, the first role of a government really is do no harm. And if a government is taxing the homeowner for that little piece of ground that they have with a roof over their head, that's, putting that family at risk. The government doesn't want to do anything to make it more difficult for a family to survive. And if you've worked hard and you bought that land and you bought that house, you shouldn't have to, there shouldn't be any risk that you would lose it because you didn't pay taxes. So we need another way to fund the infrastructure rather than property taxes. And I mentioned in my paper that American Monetary Institute is an institute that's been around for a while, talking about monetary theory. Ellen Brown with the Public Banking Institute. I told Ellen that I would shout out to her today. So a government can create fiat cash out of nothing, right? We know that because we just saw trillions created. But if you created that money, and the Federal Reserve creates it and gives it to banks and lets banks make money off of it, or they give it to Wall Street or big corporations. But if a government, if the U.S. Treasury, get rid of the Federal Reserve, if the U.S. Treasury created dollars, greenbacks, because that's what greenbacks used to be, just for the purpose of building the physical infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the train lines, communication lines, internet lines, then the government could turn around and charge people very reasonable fees, maybe sliding scale fees, to use that infrastructure. And that way you wouldn't have to tax it. I mean, right now, the government borrows money and pays interest for things that it does. I mean, it's just insane because a government can literally, and does, print money. But in 1914, the bankers decided, oh no, if we got control of the monetary creation, we would be able to create money out of thin air and then loan it to people at interest. Let's do that. So could you imagine if you could just create cows on paper and then make money out of not having to do anything material to not having to create the thing that you're selling?
I've heard stories of guys that have gone to jail for doing that. There was a guy, I can't mention a name, but through another, it was kind of a secondhand deal. Like we get, we got a call. It was like, hey, I know we had a, I know I was going to bring you this many cows from, this guy, but I got another opportunity.
Uh,
We got this thing coming up. They're this registered Angus herd. We got to have a place to stash them. Can you watch them for us? We'll even tack on another 10 cents a head a day. And Dad was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. Well, turn out that these 250 registered Angus cows allegedly existed more than once. And while the cattle were on the ranch, his whole scheme fell apart. And the FBI went and raided his offices. The banker just showed up at the ranch one day demanding to look at the cows. And I said, excuse me, you are who? And he explained who he was, that, here's the banker that funded these cows. And I'm like, well, okay, if you want to go look at him, we can go, but you have to talk to me. And, if you want to come back, we need to talk. Anyway, like the short end of the story was he didn't, like, I don't think he went to jail for it, but there was, phantom cattle on paper that, he bought, sold, and traded stuff that he didn't own more than once.
It's much harder to make fiat cows than fiat money, though. So
Yeah.
this guy got caught because it's hard to do. At some point, you're going to have to come up with the cow.
He got caught and he got his wrist slapped. And just a few years ago, I saw his name in the news for a very similar scheme, and he was in trouble again. And I thought, you'd think they would have learned when they caught him the last time. They would have just put him in jail, or, barred him from ever owning livestock again or ever being a livestock dealer. But guess not.
Yeah, it's funny, huh? We don't, our court systems don't really work that well. We always try to come up with regulators to, slap the wrists and impose the fines and things like that. But they don't do such a good job because they can get paid off. That's a problem. Whenever you concentrate power in the hands of just a few regulators, then you can, it's easy to look to know where to buy the person that has the power.
Or that's willing to look the other way for a year or two in exchange for a really sweet job.
Yeah, so maybe the courts are the better place to handle these things, but the courts are all clogged with drug cases and things like that. So,
And then you have to have the evidence. You got to figure out, how are we going to make this case and pay the lawyer.
It needs money. Yeah, we need a legal system that doesn't depend on winning, doesn't depend on having more money. We need a political system where winning office doesn't depend on having the most money. I think we could maybe elect our representatives through lottery.
As long as there were term limits, I'm 100% behind that. Oh, guess what?
Ancient Greece actually elected their representatives by lottery. There wasn't, it was only the patricians that were in the running, but.
Well, I think, everybody 30 and up or 35 and up, be in a run for the lottery to go spend 4 years in Congress and serve your government and serve your people.
You'd be great.
I'd hate it.
Yeah, it'd be like jury duty. It would be awful, but we'd do it.
Everybody would hate it. Nobody would want to be there. Nothing would ever get done, and no new rules would ever get made.
Well, good. No rules. We don't need it. They pass 650 laws a year in acts a year, bills a year in Congress. Do we need that many? If you think about what acts would you keep if you could get rid of, what one of my friends said, well, I would keep the Freedom of Information Act. And I said, well, that just describes to you all the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get the information that you should have had from the beginning. So I was like, what other acts? And if you think about it, it's really hard to think of any acts. I don't think we need the income tax if we used fiat money to build the infrastructure and then charged people to use it. We wouldn't need that.
we keep talking about fixing the money, and
Yeah, 'cause that's the root of all evil.
fiat money is a problem. And
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I've had
absolutely.
several I've had several folks on before to talk about Bitcoin, and I only bring that up because Bitcoin has lost something. It's crashed. Like,
I never got in. I never. All my libertarian friends were advocating for Bitcoin. I don't think you should have fiat money. I think you should money backed by infrastructure. So you have infrastructure money. That's a little bit
define
different.
that.
Well, so if you need to back your dollar with gold, okay, let's say we're a government, we're setting ourselves up as a new government, and we need gold to back our currency. What do? Well, we got to steal it from somebody or tax the citizens to get it, right?
Or we get it, or we just get an army and we go take it.
Good army, yeah, yeah. So that's not very nice. Instead, if we had if our citizens were on board with this and believed in the faith and credit of the government, we could print a greenback and give it to people to build infrastructure, and then like internet, or buy the existing internet cable, and then charge people reasonable fees to use it, $25 a month instead of 100. um, and I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do it that way. you know Print the money first, and then in effect collect the taxes from it later as people are using it, and that wouldn't be as painful to people. You hate writing that check for taxes if you pay taxes, but you don't mind so much paying the cable bill or the um,
Because A, those are generally voluntary. B, it's a service that you want,
mhm,
and that you have decided that they are providing you a good service at a fair price, and it's a good value for your dollar.
mhm,
And that's why you choose to do business with them.
right.
Like, um, there's some states I could mention that I won't, that I would probably choose not to drive in anymore because they don't spend money on their roads.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But the, eh, roads are always the thing that comes back on us libertarians. Like, who will
Yeah,
build the
I know.
roads? Who
I
will
know.
build the roads? Well,
Yeah.
who built
Uh-huh.
the roads on my ranch?
Uh-huh.
I built the roads on my ranch. I take care of them so I could get around. And
Uh-huh.
because I build the roads, I don't want anybody else to use them and tear them up, because that's just more work for me. So when people say, well, who will build the roads? I understand who will build the roads, but there's maybe some other. Who would build the roads to, say, interconnect the communities? Would that be a function of government?
Yeah, I mean, right now, in my little hamlet, the hamlet builds the local roads, and the county builds the county roads, the state builds the state roads. Yeah, I mean, I think roads are, I don't know why it's such a contentious issue, really. I mean, can we talk about wars instead? Can we talk about, if I look at my little hamlet, um, roads department, and I can see that they're not doing such a good job sometimes, and there's this one road that's in this beautiful part of the valley, and they're always up there just kind of sitting around enjoying the view, and we're paying for that. But I can deal with a little bit of corruption. The roads are okay. you know I've got bigger fish to fry than worry about the roads too much. I mean, they are a mess. I just drove to Ohio in the spring after the winter season. They're just terrible. They ruin your car. But if that were all we had to worry about with the government, I'd be okay, because we go to town hall and you could argue with them. I want better roads. I want cheaper roads. I want more efficient roads or whatever. But we have so many. I would like a government that just was like building and maintenance department.
Yeah.
not controlling my, any ideology or any kind of behaviors or
Or
any
controlling
kind
what they teach school children
of school children. Absolutely
or
not,
what kids are supposed to eat.
So, yeah, so I would absolutely love it if my government just built the roads, just built the school buildings. Maybe we don't even need them anymore. Homeschooling is kind of a better way to educate kids because my
Why do you
son,
say that?
well, it worked out for me. I don't know if it will work out because uh, I could work at home. So while I was working, my son was working on his stuff. But I'm out in society. I'm at the library. While I'm waiting for my son to have music lessons, I'm at the cafe chatting with friends. We go to museums together. We go to the cultural sites and the historical sites everywhere. And of course, the people at the museums and the historical sites are always so glad to see these homeschoolers because they're the only ones who ever come.
Probably the only ones that ever ask questions. Well, they're the only
Yeah,
ones. They're definitely the only ones that ask questions, but
yeah. And because they're homeschool kid is sort of like a free range student. And just like Sydney, they just bump into the wall and they learn stuff.
bump into the wall and learn that thing that fell down
Yeah.
might be something tasty to eat.
Yeah.
What I guess what I was trying to tease out of you is what do you feel like public schools are really for? For make it I'd be happy to answer that and give my answer and go first if you want me to.
Well, you know how when you're homeschool your kids and people find out about it, the first thing they ask is, "Oh my God, how will your kids get socialization?" And I wonder where they got that word. Like that's the only time that's to criticize homeschooling parents.
Probably
And
from
so
the teachers unions.
during the lockdown, when all these parents were forced to homeschool their kids, I had the opportunity to say, "Oh my God, how will you ever institutionalize your children?"
That's awesome.
Because it is a form of institutionalization. I mean, and it's crazy to think that all 1,000 kids in this school, and in that novel I mentioned, Locus Aminus, I also do a satire of public education. And the idea that they all need to learn these 1,000 facts about history. They all need to learn, these 600 facts about biology. Well, what if you want to learn? My son wanted to learn not the history of all the wars and stuff, but the history of musical instruments. Why not?
That's probably more important.
To him, he's a musician. So we don't all have to know the same things. It's okay if I know some things that you don't know and you know some things that I don't know, because then together we know a lot more.
Yeah.
And I can ask you something and you can ask me something. But if we've all had the same education, then and anyway, these days, with as far as memorizing facts, we could just look them up. What we need to learn is critical thinking, critical and creative thinking.
And I think that I don't feel like critical thinking skills are well taught in public schools, nor have they been for at least 2 decades.
Yes, let me spring this on you, see if you'll go for it. I think an important part of critical thinking is reading poetry and literary fiction, the kind of fiction and creative writing where a line can mean 3 or 4 different things. It sort of has this literal meaning, and then it also metaphorically, and then in the context of something. So if you read that kind of writing all the time, every sentence it's just full of meaning, and you don't take it literally, and you go, it could mean this and it could mean that, and you get to be a real critical thinker. So then now when you listen to a politician speaking, go, yeah, he's saying that literally, but that also behind that, he's all that there's this implied meaning. There's a little bit of irony here, in a context that's changed, that means something completely different. And so learning the really sophisticated language in literature is extremely important for developing critical thinking. And these days in school, I mean, they'll assign a Dickens novel and then ask the kid, uh, what did the character Micawber serve the clerk's office? And the kid will go, I don't know. I don't remember. They ask the kid to remember facts. I don't remember what happened in half of the Dickens novels. But I learned that critical reading skill where I could interpret everything. I'm going back to the importance of interpreting things in reality so that you have flexibility in what you can do. So, but people say, well, I don't know why I have to read this poem. That's not going to help me get a better job. That's not going to help me make more money in the world. And I think people have misunderstood what the function of language is. After all, human beings are unique in our ability to use language. And language at its, the epitome of language is that there's not just a literal meaning, that there's all sorts of other metaphorical meanings attached to things. And that's what makes us not robots. That's what makes us creative and flexible and able to imagine things in new ways. So I think that's one of the things that's missing from American education. And I know that's a hard sell because people really do, these kids are sitting in front of a T.S. Eliot poem and and they can't figure out how it's going to be useful. So, but that's how.
You make a strong point, and I never really drew the connection between, poetry and critical thinking skills. I'm not sure how I got mine or who taught them to me or where they came from, but I'm glad I have them. And I think that it's not really taught in public schools. I say my daughter, she's not biologically mine, but she lived with me for 10 years, so might as well. Anyway, Tanya homeschooled her for 4 years, all while she would have been going to middle school. And I think that was probably one of the most important times. Or I guess the last 2 years of grade school and middle school. But I think that's important because, you said socialization, like that's the argument. Like, well, how are your kids going to get socialized? Well, they're going to get socialized because they're hanging out with their parents all day, and their parents are interacting with other adults all day, and they're closely supervised in those interactions with other adults. You think in that classroom with 50 kids and one teacher that all those interactions that your child is learning from other children, you think that that's being supervised and moderated by that responsible adult to the degree that you would want your child monitored? No.
That's not society, that classroom. A homeschooled kid is in society. That's how they get socialization. And my son we'd spend a lot of time in cafes across the street from the library and the music center. So, and we, he would sit there and talk to a local lawyer about books that he was interested in, science fiction books, and recommend. So my son got to interact with people of all ages. And in homeschool, there's little kids and there's older kids, and you are all together. And so it's a much more natural type of society, introduction to society. That's why homeschool kids tend to be better adjusted and more independent. And yeah, I don't want to make generalizations, but the statistics do bear that out, actually. So
yeah, it's homeschooling is not an experiment that's failing. It's something that's been done and has been successful for thousands of years, or at least several hundred.
yeah.
It's centralized institutional schooling that's the failed experiment.
Yeah, and it's only a couple of 100 years old. And if you think about the reason why it began, people looked at kids who were going to work at 10 years old. They'd work on the farm or in their parents' shop doing some sort of apprentice type thing. And they said, isn't it a shame that these kids are laboring and they don't know how to read or write, and they don't know mathematics or basic science? Well, they should go to school and learn those things, because you never know. Like, who's his name is escaping me, most famous inventor in England who came from the lower classes. I wish I could think of his name. You don't know where the next genius in science is going to come from.
Right.
So you really want everybody, every little kid, to have that opportunity, because there might be somebody you never know that could be really good in math, and or great at writing literature or whatever. So you want to give everybody that opportunity to go into those sort of academic areas if they want to, and then everybody should have a sort of a material job that they do too. I wouldn't want to just be a philosopher. I know I have to grow food too, to a useful skill and, an academic one. But so now, many years later, we look at our institution and we think, oh, well, that's why are these kids studying poetry and science and algebra? They don't ever need that. They need to go to school to learn how to work at a job, or balance a checkbook, or cook food, or homemakers, or work on cars or something like that. And that's not what school. Their parents should be doing that. They should be working after school. They should have jobs when they're young. My son worked in an auto shop from aged, I think, 11.
11?
Yeah, it's not exactly. Is it another?
I'm not judging. Not.
Yeah,
not judging.
Another homeschooling parent invited him to come in so he just could see how an auto repair shop worked. And he listed items on eBay, auto parts on eBay. That was his job. He came and worked on, and it's just, you need everything in your life. But homeschooling provides all those things, because, I have my kid out working in the farm too, and also learning algebra.
The latest thing that I think I heard out of our local public school system is they're going to have take these individualized education plans that they'd started for, I think, the seniors and the juniors, and they're going to go all the way down to freshmen in the high school. So now we're back to trying to educate them as individuals and educate them all to their own strengths and their own needs, versus putting everybody in a box and making us all take a standardized test. It's kind of like they're trying to go back around full circle again.
I hope that's where they're going. I know there's a push in this new thing called impact investing, where you get these tech companies inventing this software for education. And it's tailored to meet the student's need. But it really is just a very limited, the correct answer. Okay, you get the correct answer. It's like playing a video game, and then you get rewarded. And it's not real learning if it's that kind of gamification of your educational experience. I know Texas is a real testing ground for that direction. There's a woman called Allison McDowell who is writing about this on her blog called The Wrench in the Gears. And she's warning everybody about stakeholder capitalism, impact investing, where the new way to make money for investors is to design, for instance, educational programs or welfare programs, prison programs, to retrain people and train people so that they perform the correct tasks. And it nudges people to be the kind of human that you're supposed to be, with this tightly controlled, online education. And, if you hear your school district talking about that sort of thing, run as fast as you can away from that. Because they're literally, they have this idea, again, it's the mechanization that we can train kids like monkeys. with rewarding them in this like video game like thing. Oh, you get little tokens and then you get motivated to do more. And, that's a real danger.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm trying to come up with a philosophy. You have these, different economic philosophies of, Darwinism, for instance, the fittest survive or whatever. And that type of thinking ends up having a lot of effects, throughout the whole economic system and business and schools and things like that. And when I try to introduce this idea of an interactive society, not necessarily cooperative like communists, everybody sharing together, but just if you leave people to their own devices and you expect them to be somewhat self-sufficient and you don't interfere too much, you just provide those necessary constraints like roads, then people will flourish. They won't need so much education and guidance and controls and laws. They just need a little bit of wiggle room, and they need the opportunity to plant their own garden and to find their own books to read. Government is just meddling too much. We don't need that kind of centralized control.
Any meddling is too much sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So decentralizing the way of the future. I've got to get out of here. So where can we find you on the internet and how can people get in touch with you?
My website is vnalexander.com.
Okay.
And that describes the work I do as a philosopher and also my novels. As I mentioned, I've written about being a shepherdess in upstate New York. Or actually, my character is a male character. So
Interesting. Well, and the other one you mentioned, Locus Animus?
Locus Aminus.
Aminus?
Yeah, that's the novel. Yeah. I'm working on a new novel now. I can't say the word because I hear, but it starts with a C, 1984, the musical. It's a comedy, a dark comedy about the collapse of our system right now.
Will you send me a copy of that, please? I'd love it. Sounds like something I'd love to read.
Actually, this is the first time that I'm, because this situation is ongoing and we're going through these troubling times. We need to come up with the solution, right? We all need to be ready with, when the system does collapse, we need to go, hey, don't do that. Let's do this. It'll be better for us.
Right.
And so I'm trying to write the ending. The ending of George Orwell's 1984 was really, really depressing.
It's supposed to be
awful. I want to rewrite the ending. It doesn't have to end that way. The paroles, the plebes, the ordinary people, us, we actually can take our power back in a completely, nonviolent way. Just roll up our sleeves, plant our gardens, get organized. That's what we need to do.
At this point, saving seeds, homeschooling, and gardening are like three of the biggest acts of civil disobedience that you can do. Because
I've done them all.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I got all three of those check marks too.
Yeah, and a few others we won't talk about.
Yeah, I might be on a couple watch lists. Probably have been for years, and no big deal. Okay, so vnalexander.com, new book coming out. Hopefully I can, we'll stay in touch. I'd like to get a copy of that and talk about it. It sounds like a great book.
Great. Yeah, I have some of it on as I'm writing it, I let people read it, which I never would do because I rewrite my books and perfect them and make them more poetic as I go on. But I've got the draft out there now because I'm actually letting people write it with me. because we have to make up this happy ending together.
1984 as a dark comedy, but with a happy ending.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll see if I can think up anything.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear your feedback.
Anywhere else other than your website that you want to send some traffic, or is that just the one-stop
the
shop?
Public Banking Institute. Yeah, this is to fund a community where you have a local butcher and a local baker. We need community banking instead of these Wall Street banks that have been charged with the task of making sure that the community is healthy and loan money within a community.
Versus the task of returning as much to the shareholders as possible.
Yeah, no shareholders in this. No shareholders. Yeah.
Well, very cool.
Okay.
Anything else you want to end with?
No, just great talking to you and meeting a possible relative. Maybe your family's from Ayr or Aberdeen in Scotland.
I'd like to find out one of these days, but like we talked about before the show, I'm not sure that that history is able to be uncovered anymore. It may be lost.
Oh, well.
Who knows? Maybe we'll come up with something.
There's some reason why I went back to sheep, having sheep. It's in my blood.
Well, this ranch was fenced for sheep, but that was under Skinner ownership, not under Alexander ownership, which I suppose is another story for another podcast. So,
okay. Great talking to you.
You too. Gang, y'all have a great week.